So welcome to the WestBIC Startup Podcast. John Brennan here. Today I'm talking to my colleague Helena Deane about EU funding for startups, scale-ups and SMEs in general. Hi Helena, how are you?
I'm not too bad, John. Thanks for having me on this topic.
No problem. We've been planning this for a while, so it's good to finally put some shape on it. So listen, Helena, there's a myriad of EU funds available for startups, scale-ups and SMEs. And really we could devote hours to a discussion on the range of funds available. But what I'd like to discuss today and focus on with you is the funding which is directly channeled towards companies, startup companies and scale-ups across the EU. Could you give our listeners an overview of some of the main EU funding programs available?
Certainly, John. So as you mentioned, this is a very complex landscape, and there are indeed very many opportunities in which an SME or indeed a startup can participate. But in terms of the most, attainable and often most relevant funding opportunities, these are in the area of research, development and innovation in general. And the majority of these funding opportunities that are related to this area are in the current Horizon 2020 program, and also some opportunities in the area of COSME funding program, the Interreg funding programs, and the so-called EIT KICs. So there's definitely a lot of different opportunities to be availed of, and this can range from anywhere from a few thousand euro to a few million euro. So very exciting opportunities.
Companies apply as individual companies, or do they apply as part of a consortium, or how does it generally work?
So in general, the collaboration element is encouraged through many funding opportunities. So I would say, if I had to put a ratio on it, I would say that roughly 3/4 of these opportunities are collaborative, and about 1/4 are open to companies to apply in their own right. But this is also based a lot on the assumption that for a lot of the higher end innovations, or more breakthrough type, disruptive type innovation, a lot of the times a company has to look outside itself for specific skills, for access to specific infrastructure, or for access to specific type of capability that they may not have in-house.
Is the funding provided by the EU as a grant, or do they seek equity in the companies?
So this is, I suppose, the good news for the companies, that the majority of the funding that is available is indeed non-equity. And this is very interesting to startups in particular, who might be on an investment journey and are not necessarily looking to dilute their shareholding. And as I said, these funding opportunities do range to quite significant sums, as I said, often hundreds of thousands of euro and millions of euro, which can be, a game changer for a company. So the fact that it's non-equity is a valuable added bonus. And also that the funding proportion is also quite attractive. So generally ranging anywhere between 70% and 100% of funding, including also an element for overhead costs. So it's a truly fantastic opportunity for many different reasons.
And presumably what the EU are looking for are very innovative business proposals particularly if they're given a significant amount of funding to the companies. Is that the case?
I would say yes, in a lot of areas, but that is not to say that there are not opportunities also for perhaps more mainstream activities. There is really such a rich range and variety of programs out there. So some are looking at perhaps more traditional sectors, so tourism, for example, and some are looking at very highly science-orientated type projects, and things like smart and advanced manufacturing and digital. But there is, I believe, something for everyone, and it's just a case of navigating the funding landscape effectively. And it is because as I said, there are so many opportunities, and which are very attractive from the funding point of view as far as grants go, that obviously it is very competitive.
Okay, and one of the things, one of the concepts that the EU use in the context of funding is this concept called TRL, which is the Technology Readiness Level. Can you explain what that means and how it applies to companies?
So yes, the TRL Ladder is very a significant feature of a lot of funds. So the stage of technological readiness that you are at will determine which funding opportunities you may be eligible for. And it starts with TRL 0, which is generally meant to be the ideation stage, or you're at an idea stage. So that means you have not started yet with the technology development, to TRL 9, which is the commercialization stage or market ready stage. So that in between you have your basic fundamental research and development, prototype development around TRL 5 and 6, and then sort of the refinement and validation of operational systems that then leads up to being market ready. And it is very important to distinguish this because the earlier the stage, the higher the percentage of funding. So the earlier TRLs, up to generally TRL 4 or 5, are funded up to 100%. And then the more mature technologies are generally funded at a level of 70%. And there are some nuances here depending on the type of funding instrument, but this is sort of a rule of thumb in Horizon 2020.
Okay, and so just to tease this out a little bit more, say some of the companies that we work with in WestBIC who might be quite close to the market, they need to do a little bit of additional product development type work, market readiness type work. Typically, what TRL level would they be at?
So if they already developed a technology to the level of a minimum viable product, which is a terminology that we often use, then that would generally be at the prototype stage, so TRL 6 and possibly 7. So the important, obviously, thing to note is how do I know if I'm at TRL 9? If you are already making sales and you're actively marketing the product, then you are after TRL 9. So generally, then you would not fall into the realm of research, development, innovation grants, although there may be some certain funds, for example, for internationalization that might be applicable. So as I say, it's like going into an ice cream shop and there's thousands flavors of ice cream. So there's truly something for everybody at every stage. But I would just say the widest realm of opportunities is for RDI, so for that stage of development. So generally between, I would say, 5 and 7, this is where the biggest bulk of funding is.
Okay. And, in terms of success rates, I know this is a difficult question to ask or to answer because there are so many programs, but what's the general success rate with EU funding applications?
So I suppose it's not a surprise that a lot of companies feel most comfortable applying for funding where they are single, what we call single beneficiaries or single applicant. And those tend to be most oversubscribed. And a good example here is the EIC Accelerator, or the formerly known as SME instrument, where through the years, because we have to bear in mind Horizon 2020 has been running for 7 years now, and with obviously with increased awareness, has become more and more competitive, especially through the attractive funding criteria, which I spoke about, so that the success rate there has deteriorated over the years and is now below 1%.
Wow.
So that is extremely, extremely competitive. On the other hand, there are some type of other funds that perhaps are more specific to certain industries or certain technologies, where the funding success rate can be as high as 20%. So it really depends on the single funding opportunity that you are targeting.
Yeah, and just to sort of come back to that EIC Accelerator program, as you said, it was formerly known as the SME instrument. What type of companies is that most suitable for? Is it the very innovative, disruptive types, startup, scale up, or SME, or what type of companies is that aimed at?
Yes, absolutely. So the EIC Accelerator is an ambition by the European Commission to identify and finance the most promising companies and technologies. So looking at maximum impact. So they are definitely looking at companies that are able to grow quickly, that are able to create a lot of economic impact in Europe. So that means creation of jobs, that means contribution to GDP, that are, born global, that have a global outlook, that are extremely ambitious, and this is usually then based on a breakthrough or radical disruptive innovation proposition, which can be in any sector. So it's completely bottom up. And to put this in the Irish context, so if you're a startup looking to perhaps apply for this particular instrument, you would be at least post-HPSU company. And I would say even if you are a HPSU, a high potential startup, and have that designation and have raised successfully finance from the private sector, etc., it does not necessarily make you automatically a good candidate for EIC, because the threshold for innovation is so high, because you're competing with the best of Europe, from every country in Europe. And Israel. So it is ultra competitive, and really just the top 10% find themselves successful at this funding.
Yeah, and I know, for example, that you have worked with companies who have applied a number of times, maybe 3 and 4 times through the EIC Accelerator program. And I'm just wondering, what sort of turns an unsuccessful application into a successful one, maybe after the 3rd or 4th application?
There is, I suppose, an honest answer would be that there can be an element of luck. And the reason being that there can be an element of luck is that the application gets reviewed by 4 different evaluators, who each obviously bring their own opinions or into the evaluation process, and may have investment background, may have scientific background, may have industry background, and obviously will be influenced by those backgrounds and experience on a personal level. But what is really, really important is, even if you have a really exciting innovation and really exciting technology, to bear in mind some key things, which are that your evaluator may not be a native English speaker, so that you have to be very clear in how you communicate the key messages of your business proposition. Also, the proposal is not just about the technology or the innovation, it is about the business side of things. So you have to show a very solid business plan. So it is not just about showing that your technology is better than anybody else's technology. If this is not married with, the knowledge of the market, the knowledge of the customer, an operational execution, implementation plan of the actions and so on, all parts are equally important. So it's not just the technology. So language is important, clear communication is important, and storytelling, because, as I said, these proposals are evaluated by people. People react to storytelling. So the story of the technology, the story of the business has to be clear and has to be attention grabbing. Because, as I say, it's a very competitive landscape and you are competing for the attention, and you have to capture their imagination. You have to be able to excite with your innovation and clearly portray the impact, the potential, the opportunities that your business will result in. And this is a fine art.
Sure. And I'm just also thinking, I presume you can get access to the evaluator's feedback from, say, after your first application, and presumably that would help then with a follow-up application. Is that the way it works?
The answer here is yes and no. You do get what they call an ESR sheet, evaluation score sheet, report, that gives some indication of where the evaluators felt that, you might improve things. But these are numerical scores, so there is no qualitative feedback.
Right.
So it is perhaps hard to pinpoint exactly what the deficiency may be. Also bearing in mind that the ESR is an aggregation of the 4 evaluators. So it's an average score. So it can be that one person's scored a bit lower and another a bit higher, and you get the middle. You get to see the number in the middle. So it is not an exact science, unfortunately, to determine. And sometimes it's just a numbers game. Sometimes it's just a case that they have received, for example, 50 really high quality proposals, but they can only fund 25. And it comes down to a fraction of a point in terms of scoring and, somebody's perception about, what they have read. So as I said, there is a slight element of luck, and there is an art in trying to figure out what might be improved upon next submission to be invited to pitch. And this is, I suppose, a source of a lot of frustration and heartache, but the companies that score above the threshold, which is 13 out of 15 points, do receive a seal of excellence, which is meant to help them achieve funding perhaps in some other area or from some other source. But it's a testament to the high quality of proposal.
So it's a mixture of art and science.
A little bit, so yes.
So listen, just moving on to some of the other sources of funding. One of the other sources of funding is called Cascade Funding. I love the names the EU come up with. But what is Cascade Funding?
So essentially, under Horizon 2020, there are types of actions which are called coordination and support actions, which consortia can apply for to run specific acceleration programs or to run specific funding programs around a chosen industry, a chosen technology, or a chosen challenge. So there is a lot of these type of projects around. So the reason is Cascade Funding is that Horizon 2020 gives funding to this consortia, who then in turn launch open calls to invite startups and SMEs to apply for this funding. So it's indirect, it's not directly from the European Commission. There is an intermediary at play, and that's why it's Cascade. To say this is a very good area of funding opportunities, which can also range from a few €1,000 to several $100,000. It is usually also non-equity. The nice, I suppose, aspect of it that it often encourages lower TRL stages. It encourages prototyping, experimentation, demonstration. So it gives a little bit more room outside the high end of innovation. It can look at more incremental innovation. It could look at shorter projects. So EIC funding and some other funding are typically for projects lasting, 2 to 3 years, whereas Cascade funding is typically for projects that are, a few months in duration. So this can also be a very attractive element for companies who are looking at a shorter term project.
So it sounds that the Cascade funding is suitable for a wider range of companies, maybe startups that are still developing the concept and might be still a little bit away from the market, and startups that maybe need to validate what they're doing a bit further. Am I right in saying that?
Yes. So what is, I suppose, key about this type of funding is the approach to risk. So this type of funding has much more of a risk taker approach in terms of the sort of expectations that are laid on the companies applying. So the thresholds for eligibility are not that demanding or specific. So, in some grants, as many companies will know, you have to supply a lot of documentation and, go a long way to proving that you have the financial and operational capacity for taking on the grant. And it's what we call cash for receipts. You spend money first and then you get the grant, whereas this is much more of a risk taker approach. Often you get at least a portion of the funds in advance before you commence your project, and this is hugely beneficial to companies who might struggle with the traditional model of grant funding.
Yeah, really good to get the money up front, or at least a portion of it. Just moving on again, another source of funding which has become popular recently is the funding available through the EIT programs, EIT being the European Institute of Innovation and Health. Can you tell us about that source of funding and how that's broken up? And that's outside of Horizon 2020, I think. Am I right in saying that?
Yes. So the calls are not run through the same systems or are not run in the same manners. They're very enterprise orientated, the funding calls that they do have, and very also startup orientated. So in general, and this is kind of, again, rule of the thumb, that things vary from each of the 8 areas that they cover. But as a rule of thumb, there will be something for early startups, and there will be something for scale-ups in terms of funding. And this is usually a mixture of grant, non-equity funding, and equity opportunities. So specific investor opportunities and acceleration programs. Nevertheless, it's an important, I would say, call it a complementary source of funding that is not perhaps as well understood, or as well, companies don't tap into it as much as, that there's potential, especially in Ireland, because just the profile of this type of funding is not as widely known. But nevertheless, there is good understanding, I suppose, of the EIT Health area here in west of Ireland, because there is representation, direct representation in Ireland of this EIT KIC, and indeed we know a lot of companies that have participated in the competitive grant funds for medtech and health related companies, but there's also opportunities in climate action, sustainable energy, manufacturing, digital type innovation, raw materials, food, also very significant sector here, and urban mobility. So these are all options to apply for various funding. So I would encourage companies to look into this area as well.
Very good. So finally, Helena, I know there are some similar funding options available in Ireland, an example being maybe Enterprise Ireland's Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund, called DTIF for short. How does this work? And is that similar to some of the European funding options that we've just discussed?
Yes, indeed, there are similarities. I suppose that each company needs to be aware of the scale of funding that they need. They need to be aware of the type of technology or innovation they are trying to develop, and whether that lends itself better to some of the locally available funds, such as the Agile Innovation Fund, for example, is also an R&D fund provided by Enterprise Ireland. Or again, whether a collaborative approach is required. So I say, if you don't have all the skills in-house, if you don't have access to certain type of infrastructure or capability in-house, that in some cases might be satisfied by collaborating with academia, in case which you can look at innovation partnership, for example. Or whether you're looking at a truly large-scale, ambitious project, in which case you might have to look outside of Ireland, even if the nature of collaboration calls for perhaps a wider set of specialists. Some of these projects or developments can be very specialist, so sometimes it's necessary to look outside of Ireland for collaboration. Now, I would just like to mention that the R&D fund that Enterprise Ireland runs can be used as a single applicant vehicle, but can also be used for European collaboration via the Eureka Eurostars program. So there is, I should say, also an in-between option. And which could be also a starter option if a company hasn't collaborated on a significant scale internationally. It may be a bit difficult locating the right partners and intimidating, or operationally difficult even to go from never having collaborated before to large scale European collaboration. So there are in between options, and also I would say Enterprise Ireland and also Enterprise Europe Network are great facilitators in finding opportunities to collaborate and finding partners.
Of course, you can apply for some of the Irish funding opportunities and combine them with the European opportunities as well.
Important to understand, I suppose, in the world of funding is the Minimus Rule, and and understand that your previous record of funding or in R&D or other areas can impact what you can apply for. But luckily, a lot of these European opportunities do not impinge on that rule, on the state aid rules. and mean that these funds regularly can be used in a complementary way, so they're not competing and they do not impinge on eligibility. So we indeed know many companies, as you mentioned, that have availed of the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund and would also have gone on then to collaborate also in Europe and bring perhaps the same or similar technology further towards commercialization.
Okay, so I think we leave it at that, Helena. Thanks for that snapshot of the fairly complex world of EU funding for startups, scale-ups and SMEs. And that's all today from the WestBIC podcast. And please do join us in the future for further podcasts, and please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.